Hey guys, welcome back. Today we're going to continue on chapter 5 of our study and lecture of Battle for the Mind by William Sargent. We studied the first chapter was about experiments on animals. The second chapter was about animal and human behavior compared. That is when we learned about how Pavlov's conditioning experiments on dogs were related to humans. Then we also learned about traumas in the First and Second World War. Then now our third chapter was on the use of drugs in psychotherapy. Our fourth chapter was about psychoanalysis, shock treatments, and lobotomy. And today's chapter is going to be about techniques of religious conversion. So I am going to make this as entertaining as possible. So I am a salesman, not a showman, but I'm going to give it a shot. So we'll see how that goes. I don't want my tits showing, so I'm going to put this, there we go. And I'm going to have the sheets right here, the images. And then, yeah, so that's it. So now we're moving on to chapter 5. So since I have a heavy Mexican accent, I will do my best to make it as entertaining as possible and as clear and crisp as I can get my English. So I will not be speaking really fast. And here we go. Chapter 5, Techniques of Religious Conversion. La 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 la. No, I'm just kidding. So in approaching this subject, we shall try to find out what it is that is common to many religions in the methods of studying conversion employed by their priests and evangelists. We shall endeavor to bring this into relation with what we know of the psychology of the brain. We must beware of being distracted by what it is that is being preached. The truths of Christianity have nothing to do with the beliefs inspired by the rites of pagan religions or of devil worshippers, but the psychological mechanisms of which use has been made by religions on each side of this gulf will bear the closest examination. Ooh, this is already exciting. The leaders of successful faiths have never, it may in fact be said, dispersed entirely with psychological weapons in their attempts to confer spiritual grace. Okay, what the fuck is confer or confer? Like confess, bestow on, consult, grant. Let me see. How do you pronounce it? Because I have no idea. Confer. It sounds to me like confess. So confer. A little louder, bitch. Confer. And it means bestow a little degree, benefit, or right. Like to bestow on you. Okay. So I was wondering what the fuck is going to be the benefit of having a discussion about this when nowadays anyone can literally just have their iPhone read it to them. So the benefit that you're gonna have from studying this with me is that anything that I don't understand, it is likely that there is gonna be some people there that also do not understand it either. So that way we can clear up what it is that the book is trying to convey. And it is not just a robotic voice with no soul trying to explain it to you. So the last sentence said, the leaders of successful faiths have never, it may be in fact be said, dispersed entirely with physiological weapons in their attempts to confer spiritual grace on their fellow men. So that last sentence was kind of confusing. So what we're gonna do is that I'm gonna copy it and then I'm gonna put it on Gemini, which is the AI app from Google. And then I'm gonna see what it means, because honestly, that last sentence didn't make a lot of sense to me. So it was copying. Let's see. I'm opening Gemini. Thanks, Gemini. So I'm closing the quote. Let's see. So now we're facing the sentence that said, the leaders of successful faiths have never, it may in fact be said, and this is what it says. Even in successful religions, leaders have often used methods that affect people's bodies, such as rituals or practices, to help them achieve spiritual alignment. Really? That does actually make sense. Wow. So Gemini is amazing to rephrase sentences. So I'm going to rephrase you the sentence. And then I'm going to tell you what is the rephrasing of Gemini. It's so amazing. It says the following. Rephrase, make the following sentence easier to understand. Open quote. The leaders of successful faiths have never, it may in fact be said, dispersed entirely with physiological weapons on their attempts to confer spiritual grace on their fellow men. And this is the rephrased version. Even in successful religions, leaders have often used methods that affect people's bodies, such as rituals or practices, to help them achieve spiritual enlightenment. And that's true. It's like in gang stalking, your body has to be tired to keep you in a weaker and more open state of mind. Additionally, in gang stalking, it only got really bad in my experience whenever I was tired, whenever my body was not at 100%. So now we're moving on to the book and we're continuing from where we left off. It says the following. Fastening, chastening of the flesh by scourging and physical discomfort, regulation of breathing, disclosure of awesome mysteries, drumming, dancing, singing, inducement of panic, fear, weird or glorious lighting, incense, intoxicant drugs. These are only some of the many methods used to modify normal brain functions for religious purposes. Some sects, sects, pay more attention than others to a direct stirring up of emotions as a means of affecting the higher nervous system, but few wholly neglect it. So, in other words, normal brain function for religious purposes is modified using various methods, such as drugs, incense, glorious lighting, fear, and also this part is saying that some religions put emphasis on the modification of brain function for its purposes. Some religions actually pay more attention than others in affecting the higher nervous system, and only a few of them neglect it. Next paragraph. The evidence already presented suggests that the physiological mechanisms which make possible the implantation or removal of behavior patterns in men and animals are analogous, and that when the brain breaks down under severe stress, the resultant behavior changes. I began reading this book because of gang stalking. I thought to myself, how is it possible that a group of people can convince me of such a thing? And I began reading this book and it made absolute sense. Gang stalking is literally brainwashing. That's exactly why when my gang stalking started, I was getting so many people actively influencing me to use drugs. It was crazy. I literally had to disband from every person that I knew because I did not know who or where. I mean, even at work. You know, I was wondering if any of them were actually Scientologists because I went on a binge of Leah Remini's the Aftermath of Scientology show, and that's exactly what was happening to her in Scientology. She was getting gang stalked. Anyways, so we're gonna continue. When the brain breaks down under severe stress, the resultant behavior changes, whether in man or in animal, depend both on the individual's inherited temperament and on the conditioned behavior patterns which he has built up by a gradual adaptation to environment. It has also been pointed out that those who wish to disperse wrong beliefs and undesirable behavior patterns and afterwards implant saner beliefs and attitudes are more likely to achieve success if they can first induce some degree of nervous tension or stir up sufficient feelings of anger or anxiety to secure the person's undivided attention and possibly increase his suggestibility. by increasing or prolonging stresses in various ways or inducing physical debilitation, a more thorough alteration of the person's thinking processes may be achieved. The immediate effect of such treatment is usually to impair judgment and increase suggestibility. And though when the tension is removed, the suggestibility likewise diminishes. Yet ideas implanted while it lasted may remain. If the stress or the physical debilitation or both are carried one stage further, it may happen that patterns of thought and behavior, especially those of recent acquisition, become disrupted. New patterns can then be substituted or suppressed. Wait. New patterns can then be substituted or suppressed patterns allowed to reassert themselves. Or the subject may begin to think and act in ways that precisely contradict his former ones. Some temperamental types seem relatively impervious to all emotional stresses imposed on them. Others retain their beliefs, once firmly implanted, with a tenacity that defines the severest psychological and physiological shock treatments and even brain operations specially designed to disrupt them. But such resistance is unusual. With these facts in mind, one can hope to understand more clearly the physiological mechanisms at work in some types of sudden religious conversion. Hence, the repetitive summary. Methods of religious conversion have hitherto been considered more from psychological and metaphysical angles than from physiological and mechanistic ones. This is so fascinating. But techniques employed often approximate so closely to modern political techniques of brainwashing and thought control that throws light on the mechanics of the other. It is convenient to start with the better documented history of sudden religious conversion, which has this in common with political conversion, that an individual or group of individuals may adopt new beliefs or patterns of behavior as a result of illuminations bursting upon the mind suddenly and with great intensity, often after periods of intense emotional stress. Sorry, my mom walked by and I got a little distracted. So it is convenient to start with a better documented history of sudden conversion, okay, which has this in common with political conversion, that an individual or group of individuals may adapt new beliefs or patterns or behavior, as a result of illuminations bursting upon the mind, suddenly with great intensity. Often after periods of intense emotional stress. But since political prisons publish, okay, so I already went over this. So it is basically saying that religious rituals are very close to modern political techniques of brainwashing and thought control, and that they shine light on each other, as in they reveal the mechanics of each other. So we're going to start talking about the more documented history of sudden religious conversion. Okay, so now we go. It is convenient to start with a better documented history of sudden religious conversion, which has this in common with political conversion, that an individual or group of individuals may adopt new beliefs or patterns of behavior as a result of illuminations bursting upon the mind suddenly with great intensity, often after periods of intense emotional stress. But since political prisons publish no available clinical reports on the physiological changes noted in those whom they have subjected to intolerable mental stress, it will be convenient to quote those observed in analogous combat casualties and then compare them with those observed in sudden religious converts. So what's going to happen in the following reading is that we're going to start observing physiological changes in those who has been subjected to intolerable mental stress because of war, and we're going to be comparing those to sudden religious converts. And we're gonna use two texts. Okay, I'm just gonna read it. Two conveniently parallel texts are John Wesley's Journal of 1739 and Granker and Spiegel's report on their treatment of acute war neurosis in North Africa in 1942. Grinker and Spiegel described the effects of application of war experiences under barbiturate drugs as follows. So application is the effect when the person goes into like an opening of psychological point where like there's like I forget this, we studied the meaning of application on chapter 2, but since it has been so long, we're gonna go over the meaning of application. I know it is like a psychological effect of, it's either like when one becomes suggestible, like there's an outburst, or a reaction. So here we go. This is what a reaction. It's or I think it's abreaction. Abreaction. Let's not abrecation. I was reading abreaction. So it's like a catharsis. Abreaction is a psychoanalytical term for relieving an experience to purge it of its emotional excesses. A type of catharsis. For some reason, I thought that was a C. I read abrecation. So I read it wrong on the the 2 and 3rd chapters. I just thought it was abrecation. So it's actually called abreaction. Let me make sure I'm pronouncing it right.
Abreaction.
So it's abreaction.
Abreaction.
So barbiturates, we know it's a drug. Don't judge me while I still remember that with a lot of clarity. Let's see, barbiturates. Let's see. Let's just recall the vocabulary. So we're gonna listen to a quick barbiturate. So it's anxiety medication. Okay. So barbiturate. So it's like a calming drug, a barbiturate. Like Xanax, I guess. Hey, Xanax. Okay, so Grinker and Spiegel describe the effects of abreaction of war experiences under barbiturate drugs as follows. The terror exhibited is electrifying to watch. The body becomes increasingly tense and rigid. The eyes widen and the pupils dilate, while the skin becomes covered with a fine perspiration. The hands move convulsively. Breathing becomes incredibly rapid or shallow. The intensity of the emotion sometimes becomes more than they can bear, and frequently at the height of the reaction, there is a collapse and the patient falls back in the bed and remains quiet for a few minutes. So this is the effect of application of war experiences under barbiturate drugs. Okay, that's what we just read. And now we're gonna read Wesley's. So Wesley reports under the date April 30th of 1739. Excuse me. We understand that many were offended at the cries of those on whom the power of God came, among whom was a physician who was much afraid there might be fraud or imposure in the case. Today, one whom he had known many years was the first who broke out into strong cries and tears. He could hardly believe his own eyes and ears. He went and stood close to her and observed every symptom, till great drops of sweat ran down her face and all her bones shook. He then knew not what to think, being clearly convinced it was not fraud, nor yet any natural disorder. But when both her soul and her body were healed in a moment, he acknowledged the finger of God. Is it a guy or a girl then? Also, it was a girl. Okay, I see. Now we're reading the Grinker and Spiegel report. So, actually, let's go back a little bit. So, comparing those two, right now, the point that the author William Sargent wants to make is that there are parallels between war experiences or war experienced patients under barbiturate drugs and those experiences of parishioners in religious conversions. This is fascinating. So now we're going to read a report on Grinker and Spiegel. It says, Grinker and Spiegel report. The stuporous become alert. The mute can talk. The deaf can hear. The paralyzed can move. And the terror-stricken psychotics become well-organized individuals. What happened? Sorry, I lost my page. Give me 1 second. Okay, fine. So now we are on the report by Grinker and Spiegel. And it says the following. Oh, I'm sorry. The Wesley report. So Wesley can also record. I will show you him that was lying till then, and is now a lamb. Him that was a drunkard, and is now exemplary sober. The whoremonger that was, who now abhors the very garment spotted by the flesh. The main difference lies in the explanations given for the same impressive results. Wesley and his followers attributed the phenomenon to the intervention of the Holy Ghost. It is the Lord's doing, and it is wonderful in our eyes. Grinker and Spiegel, on the other hand, believed that the results demonstrated the correctness of Freud's theories, in which they had themselves believed, as will be shown later. Almost identical physiological and psychological phenomena may result from religious healing, from religious healing methods and conversion techniques, equally in the most primitive and the more highly civilized cultures. They may be adduced as convincing proofs of the truth of whatever religious or philanthropic beliefs are invoked. But since those beliefs are often logical, irreconcilable with each other, and since the similarity of the physiological and psychological phenomena produced by their invocation are all that they may have in common, we find ourselves confronted with a mechanistic principle deserving the most careful examination. Just as we have hitherto selected Pavlov's experiments on dogs to illustrate one aspect of our larger problem, and war neurosis of World War II to illustrate another, so here John Wesley's methods and results will be selected as typical of those seen in an effective and socially valuable religious setting. Nobody can doubt their religious efficacy or social value, for his preaching converted people by the thousands. And he also built up an efficient system for perpetuating these beliefs. So just as we earlier talked about Pavlov's experiments to illustrate one aspect of the problem that we aforementioned, and then we also illustrated war neurosis of World War II to illustrate the other problem. And now we're going to talk about John Wesley's methods of conversion, because there is documentation of this guy, of Wesley, John Wesley. John Wesley's preaching converted people by the thousands. So that's what we're going to be using that as an example. So Harold Nicholson wrote in 1955, finally, a revivalist of genius appeared in the person of John Wesley. This English is so weird. On the death of Wesley in 1791, heathenism returned for a short while to England. Okay, so what's heathenism? Heathen is like a whore. Define heathenism. So heathenism is based on the pre-Christian religions of the Germanic peoples of the Iron Age and Middle Ages. Practitioners use historical, archaeological, and folkloric evidence to reconstruct these past belief systems. Heathenism is inspired by the religions of Europe, linguistically Germanic societies, most commonly those that spoke Old Norse. Some heathen group considers heathenry to be an ethnic religion with links to a Germanic race and believe it should be reserved for people of Northern European descent. However, a much larger proportion of heathens believe the religion is open to all. The word heathen is a synonym for pagan and has historically been used to designate non-Christians, usually in a derogatory way. The word heathen likely comes from a term for a country inhabitant, in particular heath dweller. I thought it meant like a whore.
Reveal your salvation, since I am your favorite among these heathens.
I just thought it meant whore for some reason. Oh, so it is still derogatory. So the word heathen is also derogatory. So the word heathen is also derogatory. It has two meanings apparently. It can be used to describe someone who is not religious. So I'm technically I am a heathen, but it also is referred to someone who is actively offensive to a religion, or it can mean uncultured. So someone who is not cultured. Why do I believe that everything means whore?
I'd like to be given over to shameful lust.
And they shall be white as snow, except you're all heathens.
Okay, so now we're gonna go back to the reading. we just figured out that heathenism doesn't mean whore. So apparently heathenism returned when Wesley died in 1791. So on the death of Wesley in 1791, heathenism returned for a short while to England. The church almost reverted to the condition which Bishop Butler denounced in 1736. Bishop Butler did not foresee the great flame that John Wesley was so shortly to kindle, or that after a temporary reaction, the evangelicals would receive from Wesley's hand a torch that was to smoke and flicker for some 80 years. So in other words, John Wesley appeared, and when Wesley died in 1791, heathenism returned for a little bit to England, and the church almost reverted to the condition which Bishop Butler... What does denounce exactly mean? Denounce. Publicly declared to be wrong or evil. So, okay, so that's I thought it was the same, but less severe. To declare something as wrong or evil, that's pretty harsh. So the church almost went back to the condition which was denounced in 1736. And the Bishop Butler did not foresee the John Wesley, I'm gonna use Gemini. So when you copy it, there is some mistakes. I guess the OS doesn't recognize the font too clearly. So we are rephrasing the package. And it says the following. Finally, so we are rephrasing the italicized part to the following. Finally, a brilliant and influential religious leader emerged in the form of John Wesley. Okay? When Wesley died in 1971, in 1791, religious apathy and a decline in the faith briefly returned to England. Okay? The church nearly fell back into the state of neglect that the Bishop Butler had criticized in 1736. However, Bishop Butler couldn't have predicted the widespread impact of John Wesley's teachings. Although there was a temporary setback, the evangelical movement, inspired by Wesley's ideas, continued to grow and influence religion in England for about 80 years, even though its impact sometimes seemed uncertain or wavering. Okay. I feel like these sentences are unnecessarily complex. I think it's the era, but Gemini is an incredible rephraser. Okay, so now we're moving on. It is now generally admitted that he made great numbers of ordinary English people think less about their material well-being than their spiritual salvation, thus fortifying them at a critical period of the French Revolution. So this was when the United States was being formed. Against the dangerous materialistic teachings of Tom Paine, the powerful influence of the Methodist revival still permeates England in the form of its nonconformist conscience. Moreover, it was descendants of those who fostered this powerful religious movement in England, who later pioneered the great trade union movement of the present era. The 18th century, like the 20th, considered itself an age of reason. The intellect was in fact held to be far more important than the emotions, when habits of thought and behavior needed to be dictated. Wesley's great success was due to his finding that such habits were mostly easily implanted or eradicated by a tremendous assault on the emotions. Most Wesleyan ministers not confess themselves bewildered when they read the detailed reports of his conversions, after blinding their eyes to the tremendous power still latent in the technique he employed. All evidence goes to show that there can be no new Protestant revival while the policy continues of appealing mainly to adult intelligence and reason, and until church leaders consent to make more advantage. And until church leaders consent to take more advantage of the normal person's emotional mechanism for disrupting old behavior patterns and implanting new. Holy shit. This is the same thing that gang stalking works through. Your emotions are assaulted to an extreme, and the emotions overpower your sense of reason. That's exactly what happens in gang stalking. Exactly. If you're new to the channel, Gang stalking is when a bunch of stupid people try to fuck you up, and in that process, you get convinced of crazy realities. But the truth is that there is a bunch of people fucking with you all the time. I am covering the similarities between this and gang stalking because I lived gang stalking for 7 years. And during that time, there was so much shit talking and impersonations of me everywhere online. Like, my reputation was smeared to the fucking floor. It was insane. So I had to literally stop talking to everyone. But during those 7 years, I lived a lot of crazy experiences, which you can actually find on the playlist of the gang stalking playbook. There, I'm using an emoji face and I tell you all the shit that I experienced back then. So the reason that I began reading this book was because I needed some reasoning. And this book actually gave me a lot of insight into understanding the actual workings of gang stalking. This book literally gave me so much clarity that I was able to snap out of it and understand exactly everything that was happening to me. Gang stalking is like a religious conversion where people around you are continuously stressing you out and imposing new beliefs on you. So you start believing all this crazy shit. The truth is that I always knew that there was something going on, that something was gonna happen, as in something was being done to me, but I couldn't understand it. So I never said anything because I didn't want to appear like a crazy person. So I waited until I understood everything before I could actually talk about it. So if you happen to know who I am and if you know me in person, that's why I disappeared for 7 years, because I had a bunch of haters that were doing a bunch of crazy shit to me, and I have to leave. But I'm fine. If you want to know all the shit that I went through, all that information is in my channel. So coming back to this, so here, what we just read talks about the 18th century, which was considered an age of reason. The intellect was taken more, it was given more importance than the emotions. And when habits of thought had to be dictated, people were assaulted emotionally via religion. And that Wesleyan ministers confessed to be bewildered when they read the reports of the conversions. They didn't know the tremendous power that the techniques that Wesley had to minister were so powerful. And no new Protestant revival can happen while policy continues to be appealing to adult intelligence and reason, until the church decides and consents leaders to take advantage of the normal person's emotional mechanism. So in order to disrupt old behavior and implant new behavior. That's insane. Oh my God. This is fucking crazy. Okay, so now we'll continue on the reading. Wesley's own efforts as a preacher were relatively ineffective until his own heart became strangely warmed at a meeting in Aldersgate Street in 1738. He had previously gone for help in a state of severe mental depression to Peter Bollier, a Moravian missionary, having returned a total failure from being the pastor of the newly founded colony of Georgia. Hitherto, he had always believed that spiritual salvation could be achieved only by the performance of good works, as opposed to faith alone. His sudden conversion transformed him into one who puts faith beyond everything, enabling him to cast all his fears aside, and he found a sudden ally in his brother Charles, who had been with him in Georgia, and whom Peter Bollier had also been trying to change. Charles was likewise suffering from acute mental depression, induced both by his own Georgia experiences and by physical debilitation after the second attack of pleurisy. Okay, so I do not know what pleurisy is, so we're gonna go check that out. Pleurisy, like pleasure, but issy, like pussy. Let's see, pleurisy. So pleurisy is inflammation of the tissues that line the lungs and the chest cavity. Pleurisy is a condition in which the pleura, two large thin layers of tissue that separate your lungs from your chest wall, pleurisy, I've never even heard about it, becomes inflamed. So also called pleuritis. Pleurisy causes sharp chest pain, pleuritic pain that worsens during breathing. Okay. Okay, so now we're going back. These sudden conversions of both brothers with an interval of only 3 days between them to a belief in the certainty of salvation by faith rather than by good works are probably described in one of Charles Wesley's famous hymns. And now we're going to go read the hymn.